Hello there, and welcome back to the SWTVC podcast, the audio home of the SWTVC crew and the ongoing push for the continued existence, expansion, and success of the heritage scale of Star Wars collecting. I'm Evan, or as you may know me on Instagram, Mile High Ground, and I am joined, as always, by the true host of the show, John Lindquist, aka The Vintage Concepts. How you doing, John?
Good. How are you?
Better than you. I'm not sick,
but getting over it.
Yeah. But you know what? The cool thing for you is you've already got a cool, deep voice, and it's going to sound even better and sexier, this voice. And everybody's going to be like, yeah, we want him.
That was my hope. That was my dream. That's why I got sick. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel you. Well, this week we are wanting to focus on a little show. You may have heard of it. It aired from 2013 to 2018.
Close.
2014 to 2018.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's in the notes. Together. We'll get into it.
Yes. It's called Star Wars Rebels. And I know there's some folks, maybe even listeners of this show, that think I don't watch cartoons. Well, buckle up. You're about to listen to an hour and a half of why you're wrong. So, but before we jump into that topic, let's kind of go over the usual business here at the top of the show, including mail call. John, have you gotten anything in lately?
I got some actual mail. As you said, Target is actually shipping some of their bobas at this point. They shipped my 90s bobas in actually surprisingly good condition. 2 of them in a box with no protection whatsoever, but one is good enough to keep carded. One was good enough to open. And a local friend found the 80s ones at a store. I see them popping up around town, which is nice. So, yeah, we can finally move on from this boba experience. Unless you didn't find the Kinner ones in store when they were in store for like a day 3 months ago, and still have not shipped.
Yeah, they're just sitting there. My 90s ones shipped from Target. In fact, I just got a shipping notice. I canceled one because I got one in store. Woohoo! I told the story on a previous episode of the podcast. But then I got the whole delay approval needed email from Target for my other one of those and thought, I'll just let that go because they just love to cancel pre-orders. They didn't cancel it. They shipped it this week. So I'm ending up with an extra one of those.
Wow.
My local Target has the 80s ones in stock. They have had them for 2 weeks and I've been watching the stock slowly drip away. And every time I go, they're like, we can't find those, or those don't exist, or we don't have them. And then it's like, okay, all right. So dear listeners, if anybody wants to trade one of their 80s fets for my extra 90s fet, please let me know. I really do want that boba all of a sudden. What a absolute crumple from 10 months ago. And I was like, I'll never buy these overpriced repaints.
Now you see it and you need it.
Yeah, man, they got me. Being a completist is an illness. Again,
it's hard.
Frequently with my therapist about it. Actually, speaking of Target, just real quick, I did check those clearance, folks. I got some TVC Dark Troopers for $7.94.
Damn.
Yeah, so that was nice. Meanwhile, Walmart is blowing out their Star Wars inventory, which is mostly just Black Series, for $1. At my location. The Dark Troopers were $5. So even the Black Series figures end up being steeply discounted, more so than vintage collection counterparts. So I don't know what's going on there. Whatever.
I will say real quick on the boba, on the one that I opened, I do think the paint is really cool on the 90s one. That's the Cal Kennedy, Cal Kestis.
Cam Kennedy.
Cam Kennedy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's such an, you see some of these things and you're like, do we need these? I don't know. It's better than carbonized, better than some of the other wacky repaints we've seen, but it's a unique look. I do like the kind of the brush strokes and the little circles, little bubble looking things on his, it's hard to describe. Again, great in audio format.
Yeah.
But, it's really striking when you get it in hand. I will say that.
A little cell shaded kind of.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. And he's got his Empire Strikes Back blasters, which I think is interesting because it's his Return of the Jedi sculpt still, but something different, something a little bit unique. I don't know.
I like those oddities, like the kind of animated stuff as exclusives, not carbonized, but like still the wacky repainted stuff you wouldn't get otherwise. Life Day Chewbacca, of course.
It's sourced from something. Life Day Chewie is essential to everyone's collection, of course, but
everyone should love it.
Sure, yeah. Spreading the gospel of Life Day.
Speaking of Wookiees, we got one in the mail this week. Kersantin.
Wow, yes. He's a big boy. Maybe not as
Yes, he
tall as some
is.
people want. Everyone thinks he should be 10 feet tall or something. Even, he's 7'10", which is still pretty good.
This is the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive, as you've said, John. It's kind of like preview of the sculpt. I don't remember your exact wording from last episode talking about it.
Yeah, it's got an exclusive head. So if you want the entire Chrysanthemum experience, you're going to have to get both releases to get both heads. But all the accessories from the mainline deluxe set are available in this as well, plus some extra blasters and things. We went over it last time, but it's a great figure. It's an awesome figure.
I do just want to say I actually had a lot of fun opening this figure up. I really liked the packaging, the presentation of it. Do I want that for every figure? No, but I did have fun with that. I thought it was pretty neat. So anyway, that was nice to get something new in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that's actually on the way to most folks stateside, I think overseas, everybody's gotten it as well, is the Tusken Raider 4-pack coming from Hasbro Pulse.
Yes.
That's the one with the Tusken Chieftain and a few other Dune Sea Tusken Grunts. I'm excited. I think mine is supposed to show up Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah, mine says Wednesday currently, so some people have already gotten it in hand in the States.
So that'll be nice. And then another big thing, the HasLab that wasn't a HasLab, the Boba Fett's throne room is en route or in hand for folks in Europe, and no movement yet here, but
no, still showing almost a month away. But yeah, Lewis has his, Tim has his, all our British pals already got theirs. They win this round yet again.
Yeah, they win that round. Part of me is just like, ooh, I wouldn't mind if it charged after the ghost so that, I don't have to worry about the ghost. So,
yes.
But yeah, it's a big ticket item. So.
Speaking of worrying about the ghost.
Woo! Where are we at with that?
I'm not worried about it. We are currently at this very second 9,572 backers,
cool.
Which is almost exactly a little bit over halfway between the 8,000 needed to back the ghost in general with Hera and the 11,000 needed to get Ezra. So we're about 1,500 right in between there.
Cool.
We still got over a month to go, so I think there's no, at the time of recording anyway, we'll have slightly less than a month to go when you actually hear this episode. But over on Instagram, Rives Junctionite, which is apparently Rives Junction is a place somewhere. Had to look it up. They're posting updates on Instagram and showing how it's tracking. It's tracking very similarly to the Razor Crest. It's, we're hitting the mid-campaign doldrums a little bit, where it's obviously not going to get thousands of new backers each and every single day. But it's right on track to be, it's already successful, it's already backed. But keep those backer numbers flowing in so we can get all the Ghost crew along with it. Just comparing it to the Razor Crest, just as a reminder, the Razor Crest was not only $150 cheaper, but it had a lower backer threshold of only 6,000, and the first two tiers were at 8,000 and 10,000. So if it feels like there was more progress on the Razor Crest at this point in the campaign, that is why, because everything was just a little bit lower.
So yeah, the Razor Crest, we already almost beat to the second tier.
Yeah.
The Razor Crest. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but yeah, everything's just a little bit higher. They both end at 17,000 with the final tier, but there's more tiers in there for the Razor Crest, so.
Cool.
It's going fine, folks. Keep the faith, for God's sake. We still got a long road ahead of us.
Ahsoka's only a couple weeks away, and the Ghost finally made its appearance, its live action appearance for in the promo materials for Ahsoka, briefly, and just the back of it, and also the cockpit.
Yes.
But yes.
This was glorious to see with the Phantom 2 riding on the back of it as it flew behind Ahsoka's T6 shuttle.
Now I want that too. But
yeah,
don't be greedy. Don't be greedy. All right. Well, speaking of the Ghost, the main topic of the show today, Star Wars Rebels. John, give us some background.
If you think back about a decade ago, there was a big cull of everything that was in production after the Disney sale, including Clone Wars, sad to say, and Detours, as you say. Yes, what a tragedy indeed. We're all missing Detours. But yeah, a lot of the plot lines of Clone Wars were left unfinished, including storylines of characters like Ahsoka Tano and Darth Maul. who had been thrown into the canon or back into the canon with no indication of whether we'd see more of these characters. But there was a new animated series on the horizon, the first major project after the Disney sale, including a lot of the crew from Clone Wars, including, of course, Dave Filoni, who would now be flying solo, running the show without George Lucas, though we'd have help from Simon Kinberg and Greg Weisman to help him get it off the ground at least. Rebels premiered with 4 shorts in August and September 2014 to introduce the characters, and the series premiered on Disney XD with a 2-parter on September 26th, 2014. So yeah, it was an exciting time.
Yeah. What were some of your initial thoughts, John?
Well, yeah, the animation, we know it's a noticeable step down from Clone Wars. It didn't have an eccentric billionaire pouring all his entire personal fortune into it anymore. But it was a little hard to accept at first after Clone Wars, which kind of built on itself every season and got, learned new techniques and had more assets to use and more planets and more characters. But the smaller scale overall on Rebels, you realize that as it's telling a smaller scale story in the world of the original trilogy, which is a little tighter in general, it ends up helping it, actually. It ends up telling a more focused story. And one funny thing about the animation, one artifact of that is that all the low-level Imperial officers are the exact same animation model. You can't get away with it when you can with clones and saying, oh, they're all supposed to look alike. Because it's easy, it costs money to, much like tooling a figure, it costs money to, animate, to build an animation model. So if you can reuse it as much as possible, that's helpful. So clones are a great thing for that. But the Imperials were also all clones of each other. So they had their hats, their caps very unconvincingly just brought down over their eyes, it works sometimes, and sometimes when those characters are front and center, and not so much.
I clocked that on a recent. I've been rewatching the show again. I
Nice.
was in season 1 or season 2, and I looked up. I was looking down. I was like, okay, I recognize that. Oh, yeah, it's not the same guy. It's just the same model.
Yeah,
It was throwing me for a loop a couple times. Like, oh, am I supposed to?
Yeah.
Why is he here? Why is he there? Oh.
Oh yeah, they'll have a different voice, a slightly different coloring on the character or whatever. But yeah, and Clone Wars started. It was aimed a little young. The audience would kind of grow with Ahsoka or watch her grow, and then it got darker and darker to things with Darkness on Umbara and the Darth Maul arc and things like that.
Murders, beheadings, war
Frequently,
crimes. Yeah.
So, and then to kind of I think it got there was a worry that maybe they got a little too dark for some of the kids that were watching it, maybe turning them off and not bringing in a new group of kids. So Rebels kind of reset a little bit. So, Ezra was a young protagonist once again, that you would then watch him grow up and accept responsibility and all that, which was a little difficult for some older fans to deal with, having gotten used to the darker nature of the final Clone Wars seasons. So, yeah. What did you think?
Yeah,
Initially,
I know.
I guess.
Initially, it was a bit of a rough transition. I did struggle with that a little bit. I think my biggest issue was the animation itself took a little getting used to, like the rubbery mouths and everything, how they talk.
Yeah.
It's every once in a while it'll still kind of catch me off guard, even though I've seen the show many times and know what to expect 10 years on. But yeah, no, it's not. When you say it was more kid friendly, yes, absolutely. But we're not talking like Young Jedi Adventures,
No.
style, like kid friendly. And I think, I don't know. I know there's a lot of it in the Star Wars community where a lot of folks are, everything has to be made exactly for me, or else it's trash or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, like
That's
not fun.
These are movies that are intended for all ages that we probably watched for the first time at age 6 or 7. We loved as kids. They still stick with us. They grow with us. We see new things from them every time we watch them. But it's always very funny on forums about guys like us that collect toys saying, this is a very serious adult thing to be doing. And
I loved how mature it was. Now give me the doll.
Yeah. So yes, Rebels starts a little bit. There is a younger character in it, and we see it through his eyes. But
well, let's talk about those characters, John. You've written down a nice little guide here.
Yes. So in contrast to the Clone Wars, which hopped around to different focuses, different planets, different characters every arc, Rebels followed the same core crew the entire time as they became a family and grew and joined the Rebel Alliance. And those 6 main characters are Hera Syndulla, the pilot and rebel leader, C-110P, aka Chopper, a cantankerous droid who's been with Hera since the Clone Wars, Kanan Jarrus, formerly Caleb Doom, a Padawan who went into hiding after Order 66 and is now rediscovering what it means to be a Jedi. Garazeb, or Zeb Aurelios, the muscle of the group, who believes himself to be the last of his kind. Sabine Wren, a Mandalorian artist who's estranged from her people. And Ezra Bridger, a street rat, Aladdin style, who joins the crew and discovers that he can use the Force.
And another thing to contrast with the Clone Wars, where the Clone Wars was a cast of characters based on familiarity. You know, we had Anakin, Obi-Wan, and then a lot of bit players that we'd seen in the films, or, you know, Captain Rex, but the clones, you know, nothing that was super unfamiliar, even though they were fleshed out and given more personality, more to do. Ahsoka was really the new character for that show. Whereas this show, it's all new, unfamiliar characters.
Yeah, and when they bring in, we'll talk about legacy characters in a minute, but when they bring those characters in, it's still to serve the story of Ezra and Kanan and Hera and Sabine and everybody.
Well, and much like Ahsoka, Ezra is one of those characters that I see many people be annoyed by at first. And even myself, I was guilty of it in the earlier days of the show, of just being like, oh, this child character is a little obnoxious, but it's like, yes, I'm missing the forest for the trees sort of thing. Like,
yes. He will grow, he will learn his place in the galaxy and how to be selfless. Right off the bat, I will say we will give spoilers for this series, so hopefully
yes,
you have
full
seen
spoilers
it or not.
For Rebels.
Maybe
yes.
we'll entice you to see it. But in terms of using the classic characters for Clone Wars, I know that Dave Filoni originally wanted to have a new sort of ragtag crew in that show to follow them along. And then George was kind of like, I kind of want to focus on Anakin and Obi-Wan and, you know, my characters and tell more of that story. So then Rebels is kind of more of what Dave originally intended for Clone Wars, which I think is interesting.
I love George Lucas, and I disagree with him frequently, but I do really agree with his. I want to tell the story of Anakin and Obi-Wan. Like, boy, oh boy, the Clone Wars. I am so happy it exists, and I'm happy that it made the choice to go along Anakin and Obi-Wan's journey, mostly to really flesh that out. I love those two characters. So yes.
Yes,
sure. George, make it about them. Thank you.
and as we've said, you know, sometimes when we bring back legacy characters, it can be dicey because everybody has 40 years of baggage with them to say, okay, this is the Luke I prefer. This is the Boba I prefer. This is
expectations, the things that we've projected onto these things. That
the comic book I read 25 years ago, the PC game I played 30 years ago. This is my version of the character, and it's
the only valid one.
Yes. So I think there is value in bringing in new characters like the Ghost Crew, which I think, and then kind of having no expectations, no preconceived notions, no decades worth of baggage. There's value in both presentations of characters, but. What are some of your favorite scenes, episodes, stories here?
You know, mine, I see yours and it makes me laugh and happy. Mine, my favorite episodes are some of the ones that are probably not the fun, happy ones. They are the more dark. In fact, my favorite, I think, has to be the season 2 finale, which is Twilight of the Apprentice parts 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even separate them. I watch them in one thing. If I'm watching one, I'm watching the other. That is hands down my favorite Rebels episode. That was where it kind of really did take a big step into the darkness. Isn't that the name of the season 3 premiere? Steps into Darkness.
We'd already begun those steps at the end of season 2, but
yeah, where season 2 I think really is where it hit me, where I was just like, oh, we are doing this. We are expanding the lore. We're expanding the mythos. The show isn't going to be afraid to take that journey into the darker parts of Star Wars, into the more metaphysical. And for those who haven't seen it, that's, you know, Ahsoka Tano plays a big role throughout season 2 in particular. And that finale is just, it takes place in an old Sith temple on Malachor?
Yep.
Yes. So of course it's where we got some really goofy things like the helicopter lightsabers where they're flying around with their little bzzz thing that, you know, the unsuccessful HasLab. But
Hasbro should make one of those.
Yeah. But yeah, man, that whole episode slaps. It's where we got, you know, the reintroduction to Maul being brought back into the fold, an older, you know, old master Maul. I really. Also, the little crossguard lightsaber that Ezra picks up in the ruins was a fun little tie-in. Was that before or after Force Awakens had come?
I think after. It was right after. Yeah.
but that was fun, just kind of tying everything together there. Yeah, so Twilight of the Apprentice, my favorite episode. I really love the season 2 story. Seasons 3 and 4 are incredible. I think season 1 is my least favorite, but runner up for favorite episode is going to be Twin Sons from towards the end of season 3, which kind of revisits and concludes a storyline between certain saga characters, mostly Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Maul. So
Yes. Both all fantastic episodes. Yeah, it brings a lot of major moments for the overall saga throughout the seasons.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but you got to have the darkness, you got to have the seriousness, but you got to balance it out. It's all about balance here. You got to have some of the lightness too. So
indeed.
it seems before the big, sad, epic, amazing, emotional finales, there was always a fun episode with Chopper right before that.
Yep.
And one of my favorite moments is one of my favorite team ups is Chopper and AP5, sort of the Funhouse mirror version of R2D2 and C3PO. AP5 is played by the great Steven Stanton, kind of based on Alan Rickman, but he's just a cantankerous protocol droid or RA7 droid, inventory droid who just would rather kind of be left alone, rather just do his own thing. And at one point in the series, he is jettisoned out into the darkness of space. And instead of worrying about it, he is just so pleased with himself. He is so happy. He starts singing a show tune. These little space birds start flying in around him. It's just glorious. And then he is rediscovered by the Ghost crew, and he is just like, I don't want to be back with this, but I just love that whole scene. I love that whole character. I love everything about that. Yeah, so a lot of just amazing dark and light moments throughout the series.
What is one of the scariest things you could ever think of? Being just trapped, floating in the emptiness of space, in the void of space, just for eternity. And then that's just a fun comedy, happy time in this kid's cartoon.
Love it. It's all he really wanted. Sometimes it's all I really want. All right, but
yeah, I get that. AP5 was a later addition to the cast too, correct? Season 3.
Yep. Once they get to Chopper Base, they would add new characters throughout the series, and one of the things I rewatched it a couple years ago, and then you see season 1, it's kind of slow, it's kind of just building everything, and season 2 is where we really get a lot of the episodes focused on the individual characters, learning more about all their individual backstories, meeting characters from their past, and then so rewatching it all, then seeing, okay, this is just knowing where the characters are going is really helpful. But
season 1 covers a lot of ground, but it's really the first steps into the larger world, where season 2 for me is where it really picks up in kind of the larger scheme of the rebellion, and where we're at with that, and kind of expands where we're going. And then it's just all basically the whole show is just on a forward trajectory, just growing as it goes. It's a lot of fun upon rewatch, man.
Yeah.
I mean, on the first watch too.
But knowing the shape of it all helps with some of these, as you call them. I'm not even going to say the term if you want to say that term.
I apologize, John. I know there were many times during the life of that show while it was going. I one time in particular, it was the episode with space whales, which are important. I am sorry I ever called anything a filler episode. I watched the finale and was just like, oh, I get it. It was all important. Yes. Rebels, every filler episode you think is just filler was important.
Yes,
but I
not
remember
just you, but that is a common refrain about the series is that there are quote unquote filler episodes, which I take issue with, because filler episodes are always building on the characters. It's always spending time with the characters. It's always growing the entire story of the saga in some way, in my opinion.
I totally get it, and I totally appreciate it. However, 25-year-old me sometimes would just be sitting out on my back deck watching a copy of it on my computer and just like texting you at like 11 o'clock at night, like, hey man, so like space whales, I don't like this. What are we doing?
These will never be important to the entire fabric of the series.
And now here I am, like watching The Mandalorian season 3, where it's like, oh my God, you can see the Purrgil outside of the hyperspace. Like, oh my God, Grogu saw them. And then we see them on the trailer for Ahsoka.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Like I point and clap connected. And I'm like, I love that thing. So
that's what we're all here to do.
They got my number now. Yeah. It's funny how this all evolves. The things that I may have rolled my eyes at initially, just over time and really growing as a person, and also growing more appreciation for this upon more rewatches. It's
Yes.
just like, oh yeah, no, these are things that truly are intrinsically part of my Star Wars fabric.
Yep.
That's yeah, that's all I
Like
ask for with this stuff.
one small thing in the first season, there's an episode where Hera sends Ezra and Zeb to go get a Meluran fruit from the market. And that's just a small thing. But now the Melurans are everywhere. We just got one with the Chrysanthemum set. He eats one in Book of Boba Fett, and we have one in the new figure, which is awesome to see. And you can buy Meluran juice at Galaxy's Edge, all this stuff. It's all just, they know
It
what they're
ain't the
doing.
Skywalker saga, it's the Meluran saga. Everything was for the fruit.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, so a couple particular points here that we want to hit. Just kind of talking about Rebels on the whole. John, take it away from here.
Just some of the different points of inspiration that fed into the series. There's a lot of Ralph McQuarrie inspiration all over it, as well as some of the other concept designers for A New Hope, because it's set a few years before A New Hope, so they use designs that were in the real world also a few years before A New Hope. You dig? Does that make sense? So
Yes.
predating the creation of A New Hope. So lots of things. We can kind of go through them as we talk about them. But, Zeb is based on Chewbacca concept art. Chopper is based on R2-D2 concept art with the arms coming out of his head. There's some of the C-3PO and Han Solo designs are used as background characters. A lot of the ships, like the AT-DP, is based on a Joe Johnston tank design from Empire Strikes Back. Lots of stuff like that throughout the entire series. And in terms of the animation, they're all like, you can see like pencil lines. Clone Wars had a lot of like painted look. So like you look at brushstrokes, you'll see them on there. Whereas Rebels had like pencil designs on some of the stuff, which is really cool to see. And you mentioned, some of the Imperial Super Commandos, Mandalorians, were based on a Boba Fett concept, which was sort of reused again in Mandalorian Season 3. Tweaked a little bit, but same kind of idea.
Yeah, they gave him more T-visors in live action. So.
Yep, so things we keep seeing popping up.
And folks have also talked about, the Ghost when talking about the McQuarrie stuff. So the Ghost itself is not based on any piece of McQuarrie art. However, to me, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, that the design of the Ghost is very much informed by the creation of and taking visual cues from what ultimately ended up being the groundwork for the original trilogy visually.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair to say, I think. It all just feels like very inspired by the concept art in general, both the existing stuff that they just kind of brought forward, as well as new designs that sort of all fit in the same world.
What I mean is that I could easily see like the Ghost in Docking Bay 94. I can easily see it in that lived in world that we get in the original trilogy.
Yeah, for sure. It's very much like their version of the Millennium Falcon. It's their home base. It's their, traveling space Winnebago, if you will. But the show also had a lot of influence from the old role-playing games. And I play a role-playing game. Shout out to Chad. I hope you're listening. You probably are listening. I'll hear about this at some point. But every episode just feels like a group of characters going on a mission, because that's what it is. It's very similar to the RPG. And they also had a lot of little details from the classic West End Games role-playing game. A lot of influence from the original Kenner line, including the Imperial Troop Transport, which we'll get to that again in a minute, but that was brought back again in The Mandalorian, and everybody gave them credit for doing that in The Mandalorian. Rebels already did that. Rebels has already been down that road. Another one that's kind of in between the McQuarrie and the Kenner is the short-wing TIE Fighters, which they do look very similar to the Kenner toy, but I guess some of the McQuarrie art had shorter wings for the TIE Fighters. But in Season 3, I believe, when they're doing a training sequence, the wings will pop off of the TIE Fighters to like disable them, kind of a nod to the old Kenner, which we still have the springs that launch the wings off on your shelf at 3 a.m. when you're not paying attention.
Yeah, my TIE Fighter has not had wings on it in quite some time, because it just can't anymore.
As I said, I removed the springs from the vintage one because the springs were way too strong and they were just blowing that thing apart. But I guess it's part of a training exercise. In terms of some of the characters, it does have a lot of connections to the saga as well, including a lot of Clone Wars characters that, like we said, continued their storylines. You want to go over those?
Yeah, as the aforementioned Ahsoka Tano comes back, we've got Captain Rex alongside Wolf and Gregor. Hondo Onaka shows up, the great Hondo Onaka. Bo-Katan and the Darksaber. And then also, as I mentioned earlier too, formerly Darth, now just Maul. He met his end against Obi-Wan Kenobi in the episode that I shouted out as my runner-up. I do need to ask you, John, have the comics
Yes.
bridged the gap with Maul between being the leader of Crimson Dawn, as we saw at the end of Solo, and then being all kind of Empire Strikes Back Yoda-y on Malachor when we pick up with him?
That is fertile ground for exploration still. I don't think they really have.
That's an 8-year, 7-year gap of time for him.
Something like that, because we saw, so yeah, at the time we hadn't seen his end at the Clone Wars, so we hadn't seen the Siege of Mandalore, which they have now, which they had several references to. They had several references to the unfinished Clone Wars episodes throughout Rebels, and then we finally got to see some of them years after Rebels. So yeah, Maul he's trying to rebuild the criminal empire at the end of Clone Wars, and then he's on top of Crimson Dawn in the shadows about 9 years later in Solo, and then 5 or 6, 7 years after that is Rebels, in which he is abandoned or hiding, or we don't really know exactly.
Well, he's being hunted too.
Okay.
So, because the Inquisitors are hunting him.
Okay. We still have not gotten the big Darth Maul versus... That episode was supposed to give us a Maul versus Vader showdown as well, but it was already so stacked. We'll get it at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah. Going back to the Clone Wars references too, isn't the first time Captain Rex in season 2, when we meet him, he says something like, I served with Ahsoka Tano from the Battle of Christophsis to the Siege of Mandalore. And I remember that being a huge talking point. We'd be like, ooh, the Siege of Mandalore, what's that? Like, it's our, the Clone Wars. He fought in the Clone Wars sort of thing from A New Hope.
Yes.
So.
And there was a lot of Mandalorian world building throughout. In addition to Bo-Katan, there was Gar Saxon, of course, played by the late, great Ray Stevenson, who will be showing up as a different character in Ahsoka. But yeah, so much of the world of Mandalore was built with, Bo-Katan, and then that comes up again in Mandalorian season 3, and we'll get to that in a minute. But
then there were also plenty of legacy characters as well that popped in. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I was going to say the exact same thing. Including R2-D2 and C-3PO, played as always, of course, by Anthony Daniels. And Bail Organa was not far behind, and of course, Princess Leia Organa as well. We saw Lando Calrissian, voiced by Billy D. Williams, Wedge Antilles, Yoda, played by Frank Oz, Darth Vader, played by James Earl Jones, Emperor Palpatine, played by Ian McDiarmid, and not a movie character, but have to shout out another sadly recently departed late great Paul Rubens, who played the RX pilot droid from Star Tours and got to reprise that role briefly in Rebels as well, which was awesome to see. So yeah, a lot of fun little references.
You forgot little silhouette Luke.
Yes. Who could forget that? They used Ezra's character model and just put him really, really far in the background at the end of the Obi-Wan episode, and he's kind of running over.
So let's mention this too. Ezra was born on Empire, so he was born at the same time pretty much as Luke and Leia.
About 2 days before, because 2 or 3 days or something before. One of my grand projects is to figure out how much time passes in each of the movies, but because when the Empire is being declared, Padme is in the Senate, and then it's probably a day or two before she actually gives birth to Luke and Leia. So yes, Ezra is the same age as Luke and Leia, a couple days older. Kind of his parallel storyline to theirs, which is interesting.
Yeah, not part of the what has been lovingly called by some swaths of the fandom the disaster lineage of masters and apprentices from Qui-Gon, from Yoda, Dooku, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, all the fun stuff that the Skywalker legacy leaves behind.
Yes. Speaking of legacy, I guess, I don't know. A lot of Legends things from the old expanded universe came in as well.
Yes.
Including, of course, Tyler's boy, Grand Admiral Thrawn. That was the big one, the biggest one to come in from Legends.
That was huge, man. I remember when they dropped that poster. That was,
it was, and there was a trailer at one of the celebrations, I believe, where he came out and everybody just kind of went nuts. And that has since spawned, a lot of Thrawn-tent, I guess.
Thrawn. 2 book trilogies, at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, played by Lars Mikkelsen, and we are going to see him in live action finally in Ahsoka very soon. And he was joined, of course, by Ruch, played by Warwick Davis in the series. Met a different end than he did in the Heir to the Empire series, but, still cool to see him coming back as well.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll do anything with the Nogri again. Because I don't know. They ended up being bodyguards to Leia or something, or as they called her in the canon, Lady Vader. Yeah.
Not the canon. Definitely not canon.
Yeah, not canon. Legends.
But that was there was some goofy stuff in those books, but that's fine. Maybe I'll love it. Another thing which was kind of from the expanded universe, but totally redone for canon was the Inquisitors, which that sort of came from, okay, we need villains in the show who can fight the Jedi, but we can't have Darth Vader shaking his fist at the end of every episode going, I'll get you next time, curse you. But
is that Vader played by Conan O'Brien?
Yeah. It's Vader played by Skeletor, yeah. We had just called the Inquisitor in the first season, but then we found out he was the Grand Inquisitor. And then we had the fifth brother and the seventh sister in the series, as well as the eighth brother, right? Or the sixth? Who was that guy?
Sixth, I think.
I thought it was the eighth.
Oh, no, it's the eighth. It's the eighth, and then the sixth is the one that Ahsoka, I think that's the one that she killed in her novel / The Tales of the Jedi.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's right. We've had a lot since then.
A lot of I thought they were going to cap it off at 10. We got 10th brother or something like that, and then the new book Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade just introduced like the 13th sister. So there's many of them. I do have a question. So it's the Grand Inquisitor. Are we treating that as 0 or is that 1? Is there a first brother or first sister? I know we've got.
We haven't
second
seen any yet, right?
No, we don't have a first.
Oh man.
So
and do the numbers overlap across genders? Or does it always?
It's just it's willy nilly, whatever.
Okay, I don't know. It's whatever the story needs at that time.
Okay,
I would assume. Okay. Yeah, because like for Red Squadron or Rogue Squadron, there's a red leader, but there's no red one in addition to that.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go with squadron numbering rules and say.
Okay, so Grand is 1.
That's what I'm gonna go with. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes, I guess.
Or they can go Barriss Offee was first.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. We didn't get Barriss in Rebels, but maybe we'll get her at some point.
Yeah, I know that's a popular fan theory about her. Since that was another story that was kind of left in the ether when the Clone Wars went away. So
one of the big ones. Another thing that was in production at the same time as Rebels was Rogue One, which takes place. Well, a lot of the movies were in production at the same time, but Rogue One takes place at the same time, more or less, as Rebels a couple of years later. So there was a ton of connections to Rogue One in Rebels, including Forrest Whitaker, who voiced Saw Gerrera in episodes that came out right after the movie, which was awesome to see. And of course, Saw was developed for the Underworld show, and then he was brought into Clone Wars, and then into Rogue One, and then he came into Rebels, now played by Forrest Whitaker. Awesome to see. Genevieve O'Reilly came back as Mon Mothma. We see her after she leaves the Senate and gathered various rebel cells into the proper Rebel Alliance, which is something in the canon that Tony Gilroy has mentioned a number of times, having to work around. So as Andor gets more into this time period over the next season, we will most assuredly see some version of this.
What? Grim, serious Andor?
Yes.
Shares a world with cartoons for kids?
Is that possible?
What?
Oh my God. A lot of Rogue One designs and elements in the later seasons, including Death Troopers and Two Tubes, and those infamous Imperial hover tanks that seem to hover only on toys, but never in the actual movie because they didn't want to spend the money to remove the wheels. And they said, screw it, these have wheels. Except in Rebels, you can see them actually hover. And then, of course, Rogue One shows the Ghost on Yavin and on Scarif, name checks General Syndulla over the intercom, and shows Chopper on screen, which is awesome to see.
Then you're leaving the part about the sequel tie-in for me to say, since I need to draw all the ire of everybody listening. There's also references in The Rise of Skywalker where the Ghost is in the Battle of Exegol, and Kanan makes a voice cameo in the All the Jedi bit. So,
And so we know everyone's always like, I bet the Ghost is going to explode in Ahsoka right after we back it. And it's like, no, it's in a movie that takes place 30 some years later. So that will not happen.
Yeah.
Or 25 years after Ahsoka, but you know what I mean?
Yes. Oh, and it should be said, though, that the Kanan voice cameo does not mean that he's alive because he's one of the Force ghosts at the time. So
yes, but Ahsoka might be alive. We don't know.
Yes, we don't know.
She will never die, apparently.
Yeah.
Despite many opportunities to do so.
Yeah. Well, and we've hinted at it a few times throughout this, and I've said it many times in the past to the point that you all know what I'm about to say right now. Rebels is the foundation. It laid so much of the groundwork for a lot of the live action stuff that we're getting in the Disney Plus shows. Am I wrong, John?
I still think that Clone Wars really kicked off a lot of that stuff. but Rebels continued it. But
Yeah.
yes, there was a lot of there's a lot of stuff from Rebels.
That's not discounting Clone Wars.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
all right.
at all.
Fair
That's
enough.
just very
Okay.
much that Rebels was the
Sure.
continuation of that, and then just with the amount that it overlapped with important stuff in the saga and introduced what is looking to be the big bad of the between
Yes,
OT and ST era. I think that's a lot of groundwork laid.
that is fair to say. That is fair to say. Yeah, we saw a lot of this stuff play out with at the beginning of season 4. Bo-Katan accepts the Darksaber from Sabine, who got it from Maul, and then as we saw in Mandalorian season 3 and stuff, the fallout of that, where Bo-Katan felt she wasn't worthy because she didn't win it in combat, and it ended in disaster for the Mandalorian people. And then now, yeah, they just kind of explain. It's always like these rules kind of change in the Mandalorian, and then we get an episode a year later of like, okay, actually, here's how we bridge the gap and stuff, as Star Wars so often does.
Yes.
Yeah, so they're still paying off a lot of things from Rebels, and there will be a lot more in the Ahsoka series. But yeah,
I was going to say, to keep paying that off, John, you have here where the series ended with season 4 on March 5th, 2018.
Mm-hmm. And it was planned this time to end after 4 seasons to not be a cliffhanger like Clone Wars. I remember they announced it the year prior at Celebration. It was a little bit sad, but it was nice to have conclusion to these stories. Conclusion, but also an epilogue showing what the characters were up to later after the events of the series, including Ahsoka and Sabine going off to find Ezra and Thrawn, who were taken off into parts unknown so that they could be taken off the chessboard for the original trilogy.
By the space whales, no less.
Yes. The most important element introduced in Rebels, of course, which will continue in just a few weeks on the Ahsoka series, which is so exciting.
You know, 5.5 year wait isn't really that bad, right?
You know, all things considered now.
Yeah, we had to wait 7 years for the Clone Wars to finish.
Yeah.
It was canceled twice, brought back twice, you know.
We've been waiting for some stuff from Rebels because, as you see, it ended in March 2018, just before the Vintage Collection came back.
Yes.
So as we transition into talking about the figures on this show, trigger warning for 5 points of articulation talk.
Yeah.
Even bigger trigger warning for some Nerf gun talk later. So I know that's very upsetting.
Nerf killed my family.
You scruffy looking Nerf herder.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I guess let's jump into the figures. It did get figures. It did get figure support. There was product for Rebels, but
more than just one Hunter figure.
Oh,
Bad Batch. Anyway, that's another episode for another time.
Time, man. 10 years. Boy, how things change.
So back 10 years ago, the Vintage Collection figure line ended in late 2012, had a few vehicles throughout 2013. The Black Series was now the name for collector figures in both 3.75-inch and 6-inch, as well as like board games and stuff and lightsabers, and anything collector focus at the time was called Black Series. The Clone Wars line and the Movie Heroes line had ended with Yoda cards. The time to the canceled Attack of the Clones 3D release. I think they were only released overseas. There was a Maul line before that for Episode 1. By the time of the canceled Revenge of the Sith 3D release, the time of the planned canceled release later in 2013, the basic line was now on Vader cards that had shifted to minimal articulation, paint, and accessories, and the cards themselves were actually quite a bit smaller. Confusingly, single-carded figures were branded as Saga Legends, which up until that point had been a term used for a line of repacks to keep main characters and army builders in circulation, still at more or less the same quality as the main Legacy Collection or Vintage Collection figures, often repacking those same figures. But now that was the 5 POA terminology for the single figures. 2-packs are branded as Mission Series, a nice way to immediately start world building with some of those characters. And vehicles were also simplified to keep them to the $20 to $25 price point to combat rising labor costs. So a lot of them were resculpted to have fewer parts and pieces to put together in the factories, resulting in cheaper hollow vehicles. But they got a little bit better as they went on.
Yeah.
Because I'll just say real quick, so you were kind of out of collecting at this point, right?
I was, and we'll touch on that a little bit later when we kind of go through final thoughts. But yeah, you know, the line was relaunched in fall of 2014 with Stormtrooper-shaped cards, reminiscent of the Clone Wars Clone Trooper cards and Legacy Collection Stormtrooper cards, and also matching the redesigned Black Series 3 3/4-inch TIE Fighter pilot cards. Boy, those were ugly, by the way.
Well, they were better than the plain black with like 3 orange lines on them. First Black Series cards.
Weirdly, my minimalist self prefers those, even though the bubbles don't stay on either of them. So, but
wasn't
yeah,
a great time for package design. No offense to anybody who worked on them, but
it was not. I will. You know what? I may as well just talk about it since I wasn't collecting at this point. Seeing this, just this is a quick aside. Seeing this stuff, it confused me as someone who was not in the hobby, where I'd go looking and I would see, okay, there's 6-inch action figures that look like the quality that I'm used to seeing from action figures. And now there's all these little, junky, I say that, junky figures that are cheap and not articulated. And then there's this other line that's on different packaging, and I couldn't keep track of it. It was very scattered and it was off-putting.
And plus having the name Black Series for both scales was that's when is this 6-inch question began.
Oh, and it only got worse when Walmart got the phase 3 and they were identical packaging. It's like the one with the red stripe on the side. Yeah, but the big one or the little one? Oh, God.
God help you if you're trying to just look at pictures on eBay or something. But
So anyway, the line was relaunched in 2014. John?
A lot of helmet cards going on at the time. So interestingly, Rebels did not get its own dedicated line, but this was kind of mainly a Rebels line. Basic figures continue to be 5 points of articulation, 5 POA. But instead of separating the animated and realistic figures as they had done for the Clone Wars lines, animated style Rebels figures shipped in cases right alongside realistic style figures based on films and Clone Wars. So now Clone Wars figures were realistic, but Rebels figures were animated style.
What were some of the common complaints around this time? You heard mine.
Yes. So other than the obvious complaints we still hear to this day about articulation, quality was pretty low. They turned all the quality dials down in order to hit a $5.99 price point. It was at a time, as we are at now, where prices keep going up, and they wanted to do something to keep those prices low, to keep people still buying the figures. Whether that worked or not is up for debate.
I didn't, so it didn't work on me. So.
But some of the figures were pretty hard to get a hold of, and we'll name a few in a bit. One issue that came up on social media at the time was that the women of the Ghost Crew were not offered in the basic line, and they weren't offered for a few months until after the men, which, in my opinion, led to similar sort of "Where's Rey" comments a few years later, and then a greater focus on bringing more female characters into the line, in addition to a lot of actual female characters beyond just Leia and Padme in the content itself, which is a good thing. But one issue was that completists ended up with several versions of the main characters between single cards, multi-packs, and vehicles. So I think I ended up with like 4 of the same exact Kanan figure, which you will hear about in a minute. But
this ending up with multiples of the same figures, I've noticed that this seems to be common with the more, like, air quotes here, kid-focused lines. And I see that even today. Look at the Young Jedi Adventures offerings, where if you want all the vehicles or whatever, you want all the figures, you're going to end up with 3 Yodas and 5 Kai Bright Stars, and a couple nubs, but I'm okay ending up with multiple nubs. But Marvel's Epic Hero series also, where there's like a main line, and then there'll be a vehicle with a figure, and then there's a multi-pack that has all the figures, but then one exclusive to that set. So if you want everything, you're going to end up with 2 or 3. Spin Masters DC offerings did that. If you bought if you wanted all the line for the Flash, you'd end up with like 6 Flashes, 4 of the Keaton Batmen, 3 Supergirls, a couple other variant Flashes, just to get everything. So, and
that's not totally uncommon, I guess.
No. A lot of it makes sense.
And a lot of the Star Wars the multi-packs, the battle packs of like the years between Revenge of the Sith and Force Awakens were a lot of, sometimes you'd get a 4-pack to get 2 new figures and put 2 repacked figures. It was a little bit annoying, but usually they would add something new to change them, but they were not doing that really for the Rebels line as much. But so there were 25 basic figures in this line look on the Stormtrooper card, but only 8 were from Rebels, including, I'll just read them out: Stormtrooper, Ezra Bridger, Grand Inquisitor, just the Inquisitor at the time, Kanan Jarrus, Agent Kallus, C-110P Chopper, the TIE Fighter pilot, and the AT-DP driver. And there were variants of both Ezra and the Inquisitor, because the Inquisitor would have longer or shorter red lines on his face, and Ezra would have a different design on the back of his jacket.
I didn't know about the Ezra one.
Yeah, and I think, and again, he was repacked across so many different sets and gift sets and stuff. I'm not 100% sure if it was just in the basic figure or what, and it's also hard to know because you don't see his back till you open it. I don't know. I'm sure there was a way back at the time. Nobody cares, is my guess.
I did put a ninth figure on here.
Yes.
Just since I know it's a Clone Wars figure technically, and it's labeled as such. It is a Clone Wars figure, but it was one that did have a little bit of relevance to Rebels. It's the Jedi Temple Guard.
Yes. And that's, you said you saw him around. He was super hard to get. I think I paid like, I don't know, $25, which is at the time not on the higher end of what you were going to pay for these figures. I think I got him at a celebration a couple years later, but now it's a lot worse.
It's a couple $100 figure.
Holy
now.
crap.
Yeah. I know I saw this figure. I held this figure in hand in Kohl's multiple times. I saw it multiple times.
Wow.
Like I know that it's very much alongside that. It was in that era where, you know, if I saw action figures, I was still looking to like look at them because it was fun.
Yeah.
But it looked like with all the Vintage Collection 1.0, I remember seeing all of these things. I think I probably saw almost everything that was hard to find, and I didn't get it at the time. So, but yeah, this is one that haunts me because I will never pay over $25, let alone a couple $100 for a 5 POA figure. So
and yeah, it's still a highly wanted figure, and there is a Rebels version that has less cloth, fewer flowing robes on it. But yeah, it always does well in the March Madness bracket. I think they could do well to do a version. Maybe they could do both Clone Wars and Rebels versions with some tooling tweaks.
I mean, Disney has seen the potential of this, where they've offered not one but two different legacy lightsabers for this guy, which the legacy lightsabers are the Force Effects kind of equivalent that Disney offers in the parks and on Shop Disney sometimes. But yeah, also currently Luke is wielding a Temple Guard lightsaber in the canon Marvel comics in between Empire and Jedi before he builds his green lightsaber. So
nice. So looking at this set of 8, I remember Chopper is also fairly difficult to get a hold of. But you have 3 heroes and 5 villains, which is an interesting layout.
Flip the script now, where we get 3 heroes and 0 villains.
But yeah, these figures were supplemented by the Mission Series 2 packs at $9.99. There were 8 of those on this line, including Zeb, Garazeb, Aurelios, and a Stormtrooper. C-3PO and R2-D2 in their animated appearance based on their one episode. A Wookiee warrior with Wolf Warrow from, again, the pilot when they rescue some Wookiees on Kessel. Sabine Wren in her Season 1 look, and a Stormtrooper, which the Sabine does not include a removable helmet or a non-helmeted head. It's the only Season 1 version of Sabine in 3 3/4. IGRM and Cicatro Vizago. The IG droid is based on the concept for IG-88, named after Ralph McQuarrie. That's IGRM. Repacks of the Stormtrooper and TIE Fighter pilot from the basic line. Ezra Bridger Cadet Disguise and Kanan Jarrus, a repack of the basic Kanan. And Hera Syndulla and Stormtrooper Commander, rounding out the Ghost crew with Hera, finally. Some of these were actually quite good character selections. Again, removing all your complaints about low paint and low articulation and everything. I think we'd kill these days to get somebody like Cicatro Vizago and IGRM, like that level of secondary character. It's pretty wild. Like, that's not something we'd really see nowadays.
Just looking at that's a pretty padded out, like well-rounded little line. Like that's, and that at the time, I mean, going back even a little further than that, that would have just been a mini beat. But now we're like, okay, can we get 3 figures from a thing, please, baby? They don't even have to be the main characters.
Please, God, something, just repaint a Stormtrooper again, please, for the love of God.
Yeah.
There was another special 3-pack, which was the Reveal the Rebels Toys R Us exclusive, which was technically a Mission Series The Ghost set, which included repacks of Ezra and Kanan from the main line, and a mystery figure, which you did not know what it was until you opened it, unless you went online.
Yep.
But it was a hologram of Obi-Wan Kenobi in his Order 66 message that Ezra sees again in the pilot of this series.
That is one of the last things I ever picked up from a Toys R Us. I know we've talked about Toys R Us many times, but there was one covered in dust that must have fallen behind a shelf years before I think that was what,
Wow.
2017 then that I got it.
Wow.
Yeah, I picked it up because I knew it had Obi-Wan in there, and I'll buy anything Obi-Wan pretty much. So, and I was
Nice.
back into collecting at that time, so it felt like a score.
Yes. And it's just a slug figure. I mean, he's got a articulated head, but the body is just one piece.
Yeah,
We don't need all this articulation for holograms
hologram.
necessarily.
No. Yeah, he doesn't do anything crazy action in that Order 66 message, like "Watch me do Jedi karate, stay away from the temple." Ah,
Like his Attack of the Clones, where he's action-packed against a destroyer droid.
yeah.
But this line also had some vehicles. Like I said, they were simplified, but these, once we got into the Rebels vehicles, they were souped up a little bit. They were $5 more, $25 instead of $20. So one was the Phantom Attack Shuttle, now known as Phantom 1, because Phantom 2 is finally coming as part of the Ghost HasLab. But you recently got this as well, right?
I did. I actually accidentally got both versions of the Target exclusive version that included a repacked Kanan,
Mm-hmm.
and the one that didn't have a figure in it. I placed bids on those two. I didn't think I would get either, but I got both. So whoopsie doops.
Nice.
But I was excited for the Ghost. So
Yes, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, it doesn't interact with the new Ghost because there's like some pegs on the back of the Ghost for the Phantom 2.
correct.
And when I think people asked about this at Celebration, and Chris was like, "Well, you can kind of display it with it."
I think,
Different toy line, but yeah,
and I think it's in scale with the Phantom 2 that they're doing
Yeah.
for the Ghost. So while they're undersized, how big do we want these things to be? It is nice that they still will look correct together. So
Yep. And this one, because it's kind of like a pilot seat and then one more seat kind of to the back of it, almost snow speeder style.
Yeah.
On the toy anyway, and it's got a launching missile, and it's got some missiles in the front that kind of slide in and out, some expanding wings. It's pretty fun, and
it is.
yeah.
How would you feel if they gave it a new deco and threw it in TVC stuff to supplement the Ghost?
People would scream their heads off, bloody murder.
They would,
but
but I'm not
think
asking them. I'm asking you.
I would be fine with it. I would think
Yeah.
it would be cool. It's a pretty nice. So overall, I feel I have more thoughts on these vehicles, but I think they're all pretty good for what they are. They're a little, give them another paint wash. They're not as detailed in the interior as we expect now for vintage collection stuff, or even some of the earlier legacy collection, whatever. But put them on a shelf, put the vintage figures in front of them. They make a nice little display for sure. I have my POA line right here. I'm sure people have seen it in the live streams and whatnot. But it's a whole nice little world, a little shelf of Rebels right there. But another vehicle that I think is pretty good was the Inquisitor's TIE Advanced prototype, which is sort of a smaller version of Vader's TIE Advanced. Also, much like the Phantom, available as a Target exclusive version with a repack of the Inquisitor figure.
And also, much like the Phantom, another thing I also recently got.
Did you buy two of these or just one?
No, just this one, and it was the one with the Inquisitor packed in. So.
Okay, because I think actually there are a few of these in the show, so like multiple Inquisitors use these, as I recall.
I got this with an eye towards the upcoming Inquisitor figure.
Nice. Okay, yeah. And it's scaled fairly well. Like the ball in the middle is basically the same size as the other TIE fighters we've had over 4 decades, so it's it's pretty in scale. A little smaller condensed version of Vader's. It doesn't have the long back like his does, but
yeah,
again, pretty nice sculpt. I don't know. What do you want from me? Next up is the ATDP, the All-Terrain Defense Pod, which we've talked about it a little bit in comparison to the ATST, because it's based on ATST concept art. I'm pointing to it for you and you alone.
It's magical. I love having front row tickets.
But the legs don't have articulation nearly on the same level as the ATST, and as we've said, it never falls down. It will never fall down. You can't do as many cool poses with it, of course, but it looks nice. It looks awesome. Just again sitting on a shelf. You can articulate the head, and fit a pilot in there. It's a fun design, and it sort of fits with those late '90s McQuarrie concept art vehicles that they did, or McQuarrie and Joe Johnston concept art vehicles. Yeah. The fourth and final vehicle in this line look was the Imperial Troop Transport. As we said, based on the original Kenner vehicle, which got some action in Season 1 of Rebels. before it again was brought into live action in The Mandalorian and into the Vintage Collection. So it's smaller than the TVC version, less detailed, but still a fun toy in and of itself.
So moving on from this version of the line, it was, as we all know, relaunched again in 2015 when The Force Awakens hit the scene. We got the Kylo Ren card. So John, where are we at this point in time?
This was around season 2 of the show. So this line look included figures from the first 2 seasons. Basic figures were now a little more expensive at $7.99. Oh my God, so expensive. And the gimmick this time was that they included Build-A-Weapon parts for these big, weird droid weapon-looking things that don't really look like anything from the movies. But if you wanted to complete them, you'd have to get some of the same figures again, including Ezra Bridger, who was a repack, but now includes his lightsaber.
Which, funny you mention his lightsaber, because even after all these Ezras I've gotten, I've never gotten an opener of a version with his lightsaber.
Oh, wow.
So
there's a better version we'll get to in a minute, so stay tuned for that little teaser.
Ooh.
Kanan came back, of course, as did the Inquisitor yet again. There was a new figure of Captain Rex in his Rebels appearance, his older, more wizened appearance, as well as the fifth brother Inquisitor. And there were some 2-packs at $14.99. I'll say real quick, on the fifth brother, he has now been in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series alongside the Grand Inquisitor. The Grand Inquisitor is coming to TVC, fifth brother, not yet. It would be nice to see him. We're going to discuss that in a minute. Just had to throw that out there for the fifth brother.
Yeah.
2-packs at $14.99. Remember when you can get 2 figures for $14.99 and not 95% of one figure for $14.99? But these included extra accessories with action features, usually some kind of weird launcher thing that you just kind of set to the side and forget about. The big one that was exciting to me personally was Darth Vader and Ahsoka Tano from their duel, which included a big red launcher thing for Darth Vader as if he's using the Force or something.
Yeah.
As well as some spinny blue Force power thing for Ahsoka, where you can plug in her sabers and have her hold this thing in the middle and spin it around, almost similar to the Inquisitor lightsabers spinning around, which they actually didn't do for the Inquisitors themselves, which is interesting, but yeah.
I never once thought to do that, to put those lightsabers in that spinny thing.
Yes, that's what they're for. That's what
in
they're
fact,
there for.
Yeah, reading your notes on this, I was like, they do that? Yeah, but I will say, obviously, this was a favorite pack of mine of these offerings, because, again, those are my favorite episodes. So
yes, 2 of my favorite characters in Vader and Ahsoka. So yeah, an amazing episode. And then they had a repack of Zeb and Chopper. Again, Chopper was kind of difficult to get, so it was nice to see him again, including a little rocket launcher that was in some of the other 2-packs as well.
Was this Chopper the one that was featured? I mean, just the 5POA Chopper. Was that the one that was featured on the Merrick X-Wing packaging?
So we did see it, on the Antoc Merrick's X-Wing box a couple years ago.
So see, there's a vintage collection tie-in for everybody waiting.
I need my super articulation or I'm going to die. And everybody thought it was like, oh, a new Chopper coming out. It's like, well, no, maybe, but not yet. Not because it's on a box.
Give it a few years, everybody.
Yeah. So there were 2 vehicles in this line, including Ezra Bridger's speeder with Ezra Bridger for the low price of $19.99. This Ezra figure now has his season 2, end of season 1 facial scars and a hook on his belt to hang his lightsaber, which splits the blade from the hilt. So if you're going to get an Ezra with a lightsaber, that's my pick.
Cool.
And this vehicle was repacked in the Rogue One line and way massively overproduced. And this was something I saw at Toys R Us all the time as it was in its death throes. But the same exact speeder is now seen in the trailer as Sabine's speeder. So can I get a $45 version of this instead, please, with a civilian Sabine? That would be awesome.
Ooh, yeah. Didn't think about that. I'd like that.
Probably easier just to buy this and repaint it. But anyway.
Yeah, that sounds like work, though. So.
Hasbro do it for me. But they repainted something. It was the Y-Wing Scout Bomber with Kanan Jarrus for $24.99. Repaint of a Clone Wars vehicle from a few years earlier, now with yellow highlights to match the Ghost and the Phantom. And it now included a little riser for the astromech socket in the back, so you could give Chopper a little booster seat back there. Kanan was the same figure, but with a new head, with a Jedi pilot headset, based on the ones seen in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And this was also repacked a year later in the Rogue One line look, perhaps unnecessarily.
Yes, and so let's just jump into the Rogue One line look. That was 2016 to 2017?
Yes, basic figure is still $7.99, but now the figures had giant action feature accessories instead of the builder weapons, usually rocket launchers, big old backpacks, or zip lines. And these included 5 Rebels figures, including Kanan Jarrus in Stormtrooper disguise, Sabine Wren in her Season 2 appearance, now with a removable helmet, Princess Leia Organa in her Season 2 appearance in her Macquarie-inspired outfit, Grand Admiral Thrawn, the only Season 3 figure that Hasbro produced in the animated look, and he had a rank badge error where both the figure and the card had 6 red over 6 blue squares. You knew we could not talk about rank badges. But then they were corrected to add the gold squares on both the figure and the card, I believe. And he was fairly hard to get it. This line got harder to get as it went on until the final wave, which included Finn Rao in his Season 2 appearance. He made it out overseas. I was looking at some of this coverage from the time. But Entertainment Earth shipped him out in October 2017, 5 months after the other figures in this wave were shipped by them. Well after the line had ended and all the other figures had come and gone. They had one 2-pack in this line from Rebels, which was Darth Maul and the 7th Sister Inquisitor, which was a fun set with lots of accessories, and this incredibly tiny little droid for the 7th Sister to hold or for you to lose.
I've lost that so many times, and yet I've found it each time. But
thank God, you just got to find it every time.
I love how many figures they did from the Malachor episodes. Like,
yep,
you can build out pretty much everything except for that 8th brother.
And you can have Vader riding on his TIE fighter.
Mm-hmm.
So they had 2 vehicles from Rebels in this line, which were the repaint of Ezra's speeder as the Imperial speeder with ATDP pilot for $19.99 again. With a repack of the pilot figure, which was a cool design. So again, not that they're going to repaint the same basic one, but yeah, they could. And then the controversial one, the most controversial one that everyone is still very upset about to this day, Hera Syndulla's A-Wing with Hera Syndulla Phoenix Leader for $29.99. It had a Hera figure with a new helmeted head and the infamous Nerf gun. So only 4 vehicles included Nerf guns, but somehow the entire 5 POA line gets a bad rap. I mean, it gets a bad rap in and of itself, but the vehicles, for some reason, everybody thinks they all had Nerf guns, I guess. Maybe they got hit in the head with one too many Nerf guns, but 4 Rogue One vehicles.
You did forget there was one in the Force Awakens line.
Which one?
The Millennium Falcon.
Oh, yes, I did forget that one. I forgot about that one. But that one, okay, so yes. So there were 4 Rogue One vehicles that had it, including the AT-ACT, the U-Wing, the TIE Striker, which had a repaint from Toys R Us, a Scarif version, so that's a 5th if you want, and then Hera's A-Wing. So some of those, the Falcon, the AT-ACT, and the U-Wing, hid the firing mechanisms.
They were all big enough too.
Yeah, so if you don't want to see them, you don't have to. You just keep the missile fires tucked away and live your life and have sweet dreams, and you'll be fine. But the TIE Fighter and the A-Wing kind of had them out for all to see. The TIE Fighter, it's not as obvious, but the A-Wing, it's hard to miss because it's a smaller ship. But, God forbid anyone ever have fun with the Star Wars toys. That's not allowed around these parts. Yeah, there were no Nerf items ever again in the 3.75-inch line after that, but people latch onto them as examples of everything wrong with the world, and you will still hear complaints about them echo through the hallways of certain social media platforms to this day.
I, for one, am grateful for that A-Wing with Hera. That's the only Hera figure that I have in my collection.
Oh, really?
Well,
not for long, but yeah.
Well, outside of the one that we shouldn't talk about, but
yes, we'll talk about that momentarily. Yeah. But there was one more figure of note from Disney's Droid Factory, and that's Chopper.
Yes,
that's a fantastic figure. That's a really good figure. He has everything you need out of a chopper. He's got articulated arms in the head that you can remove. He's got an extra leg to mimic the episode where he finds his original style leg. It's a great figure. He's got a swappable, third wheel that can come out and stuff.
I will say just thank you again for hooking me up with that figure.
You're welcome. Yes. I forget. Is it carded? Is yours carded?
Yeah.
Okay. But he was released on a single card at Celebration 2017 in a vintage-inspired packaging, sort of on the blister, under the Droid Factory branding. And this figure is about as articulated and detailed as Chopper can get. And that this figure, that has never been re-released as a Chopper, but it has been repainted a number of times, including the new C1 MNST4, right? Frankenstein's monster, Halloween figure.
And yeah, last year's the C1940.
Yes, which that's one of the few that I do not have. So hook a brother up, please, my God.
Yeah.
And then, yes, of course, we just got to say real quick, they had a lot of figures in the Black Series 6-inch line, I guess.
Yes. I did write for listeners out there. I did write in the notes. We can skip this if need be. But it is part of the canon of the history here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as I said, real quick, Vintage Collection ended a couple years before Rebels came out, and it came back right after it ended. But Black Series was running strong when Rebels was on. Do you want to take it on, or do you not want to take the heat on the Black Series talk?
Nah, man, that's what I'm here for. People got to like you, John. They don't need to like me.
I'm deflecting.
Yes.
I've talked enough about 5POA and Nerf. I said nice things about the Nerf line, so you got to talk Black Series now.
So yes, while the show was running, Black Series got in realistic interpretations, Kanan Jarrus, Ahsoka Tano, Hera Syndulla, Sabine Wren in her season 1 look, and Grand Admiral Thrawn. There were 3 releases of Thrawn. There was the San Diego Comic-Con deluxe kind of one with tons of cool accessories, including Hera's family Calicori. Is that what they are?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was, of course, the mainline release that was part of the Triple Force Friday in 2017.
Not triple. That was Force Friday 2.
Oh, that was just Force Friday 2. Sorry. Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
And then, of course, Archive recently with Photoreal. So the new TVC Thrawn looks to use this likeness as a base, as Mikkelsen has not been shown officially until just very recently. So yeah.
Yes. And then there were 2, the rest of the Ghost Crew was added a little bit after the series ended, not the rest, but Chopper and Ezra were added 2019, I want to say.
Yes.
And then one more in 2020, or was that 2021? When they released
all the 2020.
Yeah, they re-released all the others again with Photoreal, but they added Zeb to the crew. So again, they had already done it when the show was out, and then they just added the last few after that.
Yep, Zeb, all new sculpt, deluxe. Everybody said they were excited for him. Went straight to clearance.
But will they ever have a ghost to put them in? No, they won't. That's only for 3.75. There were a few other gaming grades from Battlefront 2 in the Black Series that were originally sourced from Rebels that go right alongside these guys, including the both releases of the Imperial Jump Trooper and Rocket Trooper, one of which has a yellow shoulder, which would be a very easy Stormtrooper figure to repaint in Vintage Collection, as we suggested last week on Instagram, as well as Darth Maul Old Master, based on the Mandalore Maul figure, which, again, I wish they would do in 3.75 as well, because there were never any more Rebels figures in 3.75 inches again. Oh, wait! Finally, they are coming to the Vintage Collection. The crew always does well in the SWTVC March Madness tournaments, along with villains like Grand Admiral Thrawn, who was recently revealed for the main line of the Vintage Collection as the first announced Rebels figure in the line. Up for pre-order now, coming this fall. As we mentioned, the Grand Inquisitor made the jump to live action in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, also coming in the same wave as Thrawn. So it is an Obi-Wan Kenobi figure, but you can display him with the Rebels figures as well, of course. And of course, the Ghost HasLab running right this minute. Go back to the HasLab. Go #GetTheGhost. It includes the first ever Season 3 and 4 version of Hera in any scale, and will include the first ever Season 3 and 4 versions of Ezra Bridger, Kanan Jarrus, and Zeb Orrelios, if it hits those tiers. And if it continues on this trajectory and gets the big boost at the end, it always does, it most certainly will. So get excited about that. Sabine Wren is also coming in her Ahsoka appearance, which is based on her Season 4 epilogue outfit, with some cues from her earlier look in Season 4, which they will most assuredly use to get out her previous Rebels looks as well.
Yeah, that giant helmet is totally based on animation.
Yeah, that's trying to keep it light here, folks, but we definitely need a different helmet, whether it's removable but scaled properly or not removable, and again, scaled properly. Just scale it properly. Do whatever you got to do from there. Yikes. But Chopper is coming to the line as well, at least as a dome on the Phantom 2, so that's a start. But come on, guys. There's zero chance they're not going to release him to go with the other Ghost crew. Come on.
Yeah, he's got to be coming.
Yeah. So final thoughts as we wrap up our Rebels talk?
Yeah. How about you start, John?
I'll start. I've just been talking. I'll take a breath. All right. So, as I said, the Rebels figures, they get a bad rap for being simple, but if you can get over that and appreciate them for what they are, not, diss them for what they aren't, you'll see a really nice group of figures. It's fun, colorful, and includes the entire main cast of the show, plus a great assortment of secondary characters, which, again, that's hard to come by sometimes these days. But the vehicles all have really nice sculpts and should be able to sit right alongside the upcoming Vintage Collection figures in your displays. On a personal note, I had moved to New York right before the first season came out, so I have a lot of fun memories of going to Hasbro events in the city, talking about the Rebels line with the Hasbro crew, or going to the Times Square Toys R Us RIP twice, because that ended before Toys R Us did, and getting a lot of this stuff there. So as for the series itself, I last watched it a couple years ago, and I loved it even more this time, now knowing the characters' backstories, where they came from, where they'd end up, so I'm really excited to see them continue their story. Finally, in the Ahsoka series.
Yeah, man. Same. Just to kind of reiterate again, for me, talking about the toys, I agree with you, John. I love what you wrote up there and what you just said. Instead of saying you wrote it, what you just said to the people who listen to this show. Again, I was not collecting actively at this time. The Force Awakens was my reentry to the hobby. I do remember watching Rebels as it aired. I didn't have Disney XD, so it was hard to track down. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah.
And while I vividly remember watching Spark of the Rebellion, which was the premiere, and enjoying it, it was kind of a rough transition from the Clone Wars for me, as I mentioned with the animation. Even though I wasn't collecting actively, though, I'd still often go on toy hunts and, check out the toy aisles and even go to Toys R Us. Yes, again, RIP, to check out what Star Wars stuff was being offered. So I was disappointed seeing TVC figures replaced by simpler 5POA stuff.
Mhm.
So I wasn't initially all that interested. As I said, I remember seeing the Jedi Temple Guard at Kohl's and passing on it. Dumb, stupid 23 to 24-year-old me. Anyway, because of limited articulation and seeming cheapness of the 3 3/4 inch figure line, I definitely found myself more attracted to the Black Series between 2015 and 2018. Boo me all you want. I had fun collecting that line for that short while, but it just couldn't. It didn't have the staying power. It didn't feel the same.
Didn't have the ghost. Yeah.
Nope, didn't have the ghost. So, but yeah. For the series itself, I think I've mentioned before, I find myself enjoying it more and more each time I do a rewatch. I'm in the middle of a rewatch right now. Absolutely loving it. Even the stuff that I didn't like the first time or stuff that I didn't quite come around to on a previous rewatch, I find myself looking at and being like, oh, cool. That's great. I was put off kind of by the series at first because I can sometimes be one of those, if it doesn't deal with the Jedi, Sith, Force, lightsabers, all that stuff, I'm not interested people. That's kind of my favorite aspect of Star Wars. So imagine my delight when Rebels really hit the ground running when it came to exploring what it meant, as you said, to be a Jedi, and many, many other facets, some old, some new, of the Force and the metaphysical aspects of Star Wars. So,
yes. I will say I didn't have it in the notes, but I reread what Dave Filoni had said about the world between worlds, which was the aspect introduced towards the end of Rebels.
yeah.
And he said it's a place where, all these different elements of Star Wars can come together and live. You hear voices from the prequels, the originals, and even the sequels. And that's kind of what Rebels is overall. Like we said, it's a lot of Clone Wars stuff for the Clone Wars fans. It's a lot of original trilogy stuff for original trilogy fans who sometimes think that, again, we always said that they think that Star Wars ended in 1983, but this is a really nice way to spend some time in the world of the original trilogy and Rogue One and everything and the time leading up to that. So if you haven't given it a shot, give it a shot. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Absolutely.
After having said a lot about it for the last hour and a half.
I'm not going to try to outdo that. That's perfect, John.
Oh.
That's the perfect stamp to put
Thank
on
you,
that.
thank you.
So, but yeah, well, let's wrap it up, I suppose, unless there's anything else you want to talk about Rebels related or otherwise, John.
Get the ghosts.
Yep. Get the ghost.
We've gotten 4 backers since we started recording. So, it's better than nothing.
Okay. So all we have to do is just do 1.5 hour long recording sessions all day, every day. Keep it going. But anyway, well, thanks, John, for chatting Rebels and going through that with me. Let's shift gears a little bit here. As most of you should be aware at this point, we're continuing on the Return of the Jedi 40 mini beat of what we do and how we're celebrating it with SWTVC, and on this podcast and on the live streams where we are sharing yours, the community's stories. So this week, I want to share one from Moxel, who wrote, "My mom drove my best friend and I to the theater on opening day and dropped us off. She let us skip school. We were nearly first in line. I was 12 years old. When the Emperor first came on screen, adults in the theater were screaming obscenities at him and flipping him off. It was glorious. I'll never forget it." To which a friend of the show, Milky Way Skywalker, also chimed in response to the story with, "Yep, everyone hated Vader too." So, yep, I love these little Return of the Jedi memories. Again, we'll keep doing this throughout the rest of 2023 to continue the Return of the Jedi original trilogy. Star Wars ended in 1983 vibes. So. Yeah. All right. And then here's the part of the show where I get a little beggy. And if you like the show, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast using the handy dandy link in our Instagram bio. That is at SWTVC on Instagram. It does help us out big time as we continue to grow. And it also just means a lot to us. So we'd appreciate it. All right. I think that does it for this episode. John, you good?
I'm good. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, always. And speaking of always, as always, keep 375 alive, back TVC, balance the scales Hasbro, finish the 96, get the ghost, bring home Bridger, clamor for Kanan, zoom for Zeb, and may the force be with you.